Okay, why don't we get started? Good afternoon, good evening. So grateful to be with us here at ULT San Diego for the Aquarian series. This afternoon, the presentation is Dana, which will be given to us by Mr. Ken Small. So, a reading before we begin. This from the voice of the silence. Saith the pupil, O teacher, what shall I do to reach to wisdom? O wise one, what to gain perfection? Search for the paths, but O Lanu, be of clean heart before thou startest on thy journey. Before thou takest thy first step, learn to discern the real from the false, the ever fleeting from the everlasting. Learn above all to separate head learning from soul wisdom, the I from the heart doctrine. Yea, ignorance is like unto a closed and airless vessel, the soul a bird shut up within. It warbles not, nor can it stir a feather, but the songster, mute and torpid, sits and of exhaustion dies. But even ignorance is better than head learning with no soul wisdom to illuminate and guide it. The seeds of wisdom cannot sprout and grow in airless space. To live and reap experience, the mind needs breadth and depth and points to draw it towards the diamond soul. Seek not those points in Maya's realm, but soar beyond illusions, search the eternal and the changeless Sat, mistrusting fancies, false suggestion. For mind is like a mirror. It gathers dust while it reflects. It needs the gentle breezes of soul wisdom to brush away the dust of our illusions. Seek, O beginner, to blend thy mind and thy soul. And so we give you Mr. Ken Small.
Welcome, everyone. This presentation today is on the first of the paramitas, Dana. In Theosophical tradition, the inspiration for this has come out of Helena Blavatsky's Voice of the Silence. So we'll go through a little bit of introduction about the Voice of the Silence and then go on to looking at the Dana Paramita, generosity. So Blavatsky had just completed writing her great 2-volume Cosmogenesis and Anthropogenesis, The Secret Doctrine. And after that summer, she was living in London, and she traveled to Fontainebleau, France, not too far from Paris. At that time, a very rural, natural setting, a very small town. She went by herself. She clearly wanted to maybe take a kind of break from the very hectic and at that time very polluted and toxic city of London at the time. She didn't take anyone with her to help her or anything. So she went off to a kind of retreat of her own to write something to complement the Secret Doctrine, a book that would help guide one in one's inner life. So this she came to title The Voice of the Silence, which was written in 3 parts. When she returns to London, she shows her manuscript to Annie Besant, who had recently become part of the Theosophical Society in London, and also to a young new member, Henry T. Edge. They both read it through and thought it was extraordinary. Blavatsky at the time actually in her unusual way. Wasn't sure. She wasn't sure what she had written. She was kind of like, "Was this any good?" But then when we see the next slide, this is a few pages that remain of the original manuscript. I'm not sure I could have read any of it. And one can see that also the Keatley, Bertram and Archibald Keatley, who were involved in the printing of things, how they worked this out into a typescript must have been rather difficult. Title page you can read. And then we have Helena Blavatsky also inscribed one book for herself. And she wrote it in the up top, you can read, HPB to H.P. Blavatsky with no kind regards. So one could get a sense of her own internal dynamics and her own also sense of humor about herself. I've always tried to find if more of the manuscript exists. This was just these few pages were in the Golden Book of the Theosophical Society that Jnana published in around 1920, maybe something, 25 perhaps, 50th anniversary. I always thought there should be more, but I've never heard of any more than this. How to study the secret doctrine and the voice of the silence. There was one comment made to a theosophical writer, Jeffrey Barborka, who grew up in the Loma Land community in San Diego, by Herbert Koren. Herbert Koren was Blavatsky's secretary of her inner group. Barborka asked Herbert Koren one day in around 1920 or so about the voice of the silence, and Herbert Koren told Jeffrey Barborka that Blavatsky had always said to be sure to study the secret doctrine through or with the voice of the silence. It was very essential. Other people that found the voice of silence quite unique and interesting during this early period of the late 19th, early 20th century include William James, the psychologist, in his Varieties of Religious Experience, cited the voice of the silence for its ability to be transformative in not only in its content, but also in the way in which it was written, in its poetic meter and form. So this fits a kind of literature we find in many traditions that is not only is its content instructive, but its mode of conveyance helps convey the experience of what it's talking about. There's a great, this comes up in a minute here. Another book that was pivotal in the Voice of the Silence early history was the 1925 edition in China, facilitated by Alice Cleather, who'd been a personal pupil of Blavatsky's. The then Panchen Lama wrote an introduction to the Voice of the Silence at the time. It was published in Beijing, 1925. This is an introduction that the head of the Buddhist Society in China wrote at the time for that edition.
Opposite thing, but I can't fix it, so
I
apologize.
That's fine. Pivotal figure in the development of Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, and Zen Buddhism in the 20th century was D.T. Suzuki. Suzuki had first, as a very young man, been the translator for Zen teachers Soen Shaku at the Parliament of Religions in Chicago in 1893. Suzuki then ends up staying in the US and working for the Open Court Publishing Company with Paul Karras for quite a few years. Karras published many books, including a very popular book at the time called The Gospel of the Buddha. Suzuki then meets in his connections at the time a woman named Beatrice Lane, who was then studying at Columbia University and was looking for someone to assist her in studying Buddhism and Sanskrit related subjects. Beatrice Lane was a theosophist, and this introduced D.T. Suzuki to Blavatsky's writings in The Voice of the Silence. They would later marry and go back to Japan and open a lodge of the Theosophical Society in Kyoto during the 1920s. So D.T. Suzuki writes, the Voice of the Silence is true Mahayana doctrine. Undoubtedly, Madame Blavatsky had in some way been initiated into the deeper side of Mahayana teaching and then gave out what she deemed wise to the Western world as theosophy. This was in the Eastern Buddhist, was also the journal that he and his wife founded in Japan in the 1920s and still continues to this day. Another important really commentary, in a sense, on certain aspects of the Voice of the Silence is a small booklet entitled Poetry and Paradox in the Voice of the Silence by Bhikshu Shankarakshita. This was a lecture he gave in Bombay, probably this maybe the year before, 1957 or 8, at the Institute of World Culture, hosted by B.P. Wadia, I believe. Yeah. This is a really, really great study and book. And Shankarakshita covers many areas that are very important in the book and shows how Blavatsky's use of paradox in poetry is very central to the power and unusual spiritual focus of the Voice of the Silence. And more recently, I think in the 1970s, the Dalai Lama, in an introduction to the Voice of the Silence, wrote, I believe that this book has strongly influenced many sincere seekers and aspirants to the wisdom and compassion of the Bodhisattva path. It's true, one of the first places that when the Tibetans and when the Dalai Lama were forced out of Tibet into exile, one of the first places that the Dalai Lama went was the Theosophical Society at Adyar. So our subject today is going to focus just a little on the first paramita. Paramita, loosely translated as transcendent virtue or virtues that carry us to the other shore. The other shore being nirvana, or our essential nature of compassion and awakening. So dana, generosity, the key of charity and love immortal, is how Blavatsky gives a very brief one-line description in her Voice of the Silence. So we're looking at a specific kind of generosity. You know, this is not the same as our normal kind of giving. That can include that, but it's all based on our motivation and on our awareness of the process. So here's an example from early Buddhist story. The Buddha called the assembly to meet to address them. The Buddha held up a flower and remained silent. Only one of his disciples, Mahakasyapa, smiled and received direct transmission beyond words and letters from the Buddha. So one can say, in a very profound sense, that this was an activity of dana that the Buddha engaged in and Mahakasyapa received. And here from Blavatsky's Voice of the Silence, the two paths, so kindly acts, and thou shalt reap their fruition. Inaction in a deed of mercy becomes an action in deadly sin. Thus saith the sage, shalt thou abstain from action? Not so shall thy gain her soul their freedom. To reach nirvana, one must reach self-knowledge, and self-knowledge is of loving deeds the child. So loving deeds, dana, is a route to self-knowledge, nirvana. You know, this is a little different than the usual frameworks of conventional ethics, because this has to do with the ethics of internal transformation. Another quote from the Voice of the Silence. Let thy soul lend its ear to every cry of pain, like as the lotus bears its heart to drink the morning sun. Let not the fierce sun dry one tear of pain before thyself hast wiped it from the sufferer's eye. But let each burning human teardrop on thy heart and there remain, nor ever brush it off until the pain that caused it is removed. So the poetic expression Blavatsky puts these three verses in a sense, gives more emphasis. You know, one could write it in three short lines in a non-poetic way, but it would be not so interesting. Basically, it's a form of radical compassion, you might say. And this, you know, again, these quotes all expand on the idea of dana. So here's a theme of suggesting that the practice of dana, paramita, dissolves separateness. One of the themes in the Voice of the Silence, Blavatsky calls the great heresy of separateness, or separate identity. This versus that, you know, contentions in the world abound today based on fixated ideas about who we are, where we're from, and what we believe. So the practice of dana paramita has the ability to dissolve these kinds of discordant energies. So she says here in an earlier part of the Voice of Silence, when waxing stronger, thy soul glides forth from her secure retreat, and breaking loose from the protecting shrine, extends her silver thread and rushes onward. When beholding her image on the waves of space, she whispers, "This is I." Declare, O disciple, that thy soul is caught in the webs of delusion. This earth, disciple, is the hall of sorrow, wherein are set along the path of dire probations traps to ensnare thy ego by the delusion called great heresy. She gives a footnote there to the Buddhist concept of attavada, which is belief in an independent self without causes or conditions. So one can say, be like the ocean, the paradox of self and selfless self. The way to final freedom is within thyself. That way begins and ends outside of self. The languages can be difficult. Like, what are all these different capital S's and selves and selves, you know? Yeah. But it's to give a sense of this expanding nature of our limited ego self, a more expanded self, and a more ultimate self or selfless self. So the paradox in practice might be looked at this way. How may I discover self by serving others? Would be, you know, how do I discover self? Serving others. How may I serve others? By discovering self. So this is quite fun because it's an endless loop. Yeah. And then our limited thinking kind of short circuits and something else happens, which is quite helpful, I think. So be like the ocean, which receives all streams and rivers. The ocean's mighty calm remains unmoved. It feels them not. Saith the great law, in order to become the knower of all self, thou hast first of self to be the knower. Small self. Have to do our homework. To reach the knowledge of that self, you have to give up self to non-self, being to non-being. We could spend time just on each sentence. You know? like, how did that work out today when that person cut in front of me in the car and I had to give up myself and not scream at them? It's that kind of thing, you know? Not just not scream at them, but just let go. And then thou canst repose between the wings of the great bird. There's a footnote there, symbolic language of Blavatsky. Aye, sweet is rest between the wings of that which is not born nor dies, but is the Om throughout eternal ages. Bestride the bird of life, if thou wouldst know, give up thy life if thou wouldst live. So, in some traditions, this would be, you know, here Blavatsky is giving very poetic language. So it can just be stated more simply as the unborn mind. The unborn mind, never born, never dies. What is this unborn mind? This essential, selfless self. I put in this example, it's in the Secret Doctrine Commentaries, published fairly recently, manuscript discovered, or not, sort of rediscovered, better perhaps to say, and then published recently. But this is very fun book to read because it's the only place where we have Blavatsky unfiltered. It's simply transcripts of her talking. And she makes very pointed comments at times, very profound comments, and also very humorous comments at times. And sometimes she gets a bit impatient and annoyed at the Victorian young men in her group and the limits of the time. But this example I thought was really intriguing. She praises Father Damien, who was the priest who cared for and ran the leper colony in Molokai in Hawaii. So she says, let him be any religion. She's referring to who is a theosophist here. Someone has asked her, well, aren't we all theosophists? And she goes, well, no, not necessarily. But let him be of any religion. That didn't matter. And then such a man, referring to Father Damien, is the highest theosophist possible. That's very intriguing, you know. And then she made a few more comments about how he would never be recognized at that time. Well, but now he is actually, surprisingly. Only recently, fairly recently. So she's praising Father Damien for his incredible self-sacrifice. He completely gave himself to the caring community of the Hawaiians there. And Blavatsky was actually collecting donations to send to him. Unusual. But he died before they could send him. So the Bodhisattva path is the core theme of the Voice of the Silence. To live to benefit mankind is the first step. To practice the 6 glorious virtues is the second. So that altruistic motivation is the initial fuel, you might say, for the practice. And really the Dana Paramita links directly to that altruistic motivation. Dana, the source of the paramitas. I wish to become like a tree shading all beings. From a Zen teacher, Yamada Koan Roshi. And there's a story here. A monk asked Huihai, this is an early Chan Buddhist teacher, I'm not sure what year, 1009, maybe earlier even, 900 AD, something like that. By what means can the gateway of our school be entered? Huihai said, by means of the Dana Paramita. The monk said, why have you mentioned only the one? Please explain why only this one provides a sufficient means for us to enter. Huihai said, deluded people fail to understand that the other 5 or 7 or 10 paramitas, depending on how you look at it, proceed from the Dana Paramita. So again, deluded people fail to understand that the other paramitas proceed from the Dana Paramita, and that by its practice, the others are fulfilled. And the monk responds, why is it called Dana Paramita? Huihai. Dana means relinquishment. The monk, relinquishment of what? Huihai, relinquishment of the dualism of opposites. So this is a very profound view of Dana. Really showing that Dana is a pathway to this non-dual experience. The Bodhisattva path, generosity, Dana, the paramitas. All the activities of a bodhisattva are subsumed under the topic of the 6 perfections or paramitas. Each of these paramitas are presented in a 3-fold manner as follows. The first of the 6 is the perfection of generosity. Its 3 aspects are as follows. 1, or A, giving spiritual teaching or imparting any useful knowledge is generosity in terms of dharma. B, giving any material thing is generosity in terms of material. C, giving protection to those who are threatened by any kind of fear is generosity in terms of serving others. This is a more defined view of Dana than the previous kind of absolute or very essential view of Dana. Zen master Dogen, who founded Soto Zen in Japan and brought this tradition from China, writes, in giving, or Dana, mind transforms the gift and the gift transforms mind. So there's another loop here. Both external and internal are unified. Dogen comments, the Buddha said, when a person who practices giving goes to an assembly, people take notice. Know that the mind of such a person communicates subtly with others. This being so, give even a phrase or verse of the truth, it will be a wholesome seed for this and other lifetimes. Dogen also writes, the mind of a sentient being is difficult to change. Keep on changing the minds of sentient beings from the moment that you offer one valuable to the moment that they attain the way. This should be initiated by giving or dana. Thus, giving is the first of the 6 paramitas. And again, here, a very profound view. When one learns well, being born and dying are both giving or dana. Mind is beyond measure. Things given are beyond measure. And yet in giving, mind transforms the gift and the gift transforms the mind. And then the next story is to show that the content of dana is not the point, but the awareness and the motivation. A king gave his beard as medicine to cure his retainer's disease. A child offered sand to Buddha and became king, Ashoka, in a later birth. They were not greedy for reward, but only shared what they could. To launch a boat or build a bridge is an act of giving. If you study giving closely, you see that to accept a body and to give up the body are both giving. Making a living and producing things can be nothing other than giving. To leave flowers to the wind, to leave birds to the seasons are also acts of giving. So the Buddha taught that when we give to others, we give without expectation of reward. We give without attaching to either the gift or the recipient. We practice giving to release greed and self-clinging. Bhikshu Bodhi, a current Theravadan monk and scholar, writes, the practice of giving is universally recognized as one of the most basic human virtues, a quality that testifies to the depth of one's humanity and one's capacity for self-transcendence. In the teaching of the Buddha, too, the practice of giving claims a place of special eminence, one which singles it out as being, in a sense, the foundation and seed of spiritual development. So the dana paramita, beyond merely giving material goods or donations, encompasses a broad range of selfless acts, selfless sharing of time, knowledge, compassion, support, and wisdom teachings or dharma. Dana encapsulates our altruistic motivation to give without the expectation of reciprocation or personal gain, a seamless activity where the activity of giving and the result are selflessly unified. I think we can pause here for any questions or comments.
Okay. That was just lovely. There's so many arrows to the heart. So thank you so much. That's quite remarkable. Of all these teachers, the expression of all these teachers. But I wondered what your reflections were on the first part of the sentence in the Aquarian Almanac from Hermes about love or dana. It says that true love is a creative force that emanates from the one logo. So does that mean that when we really love, we've lost ourselves? We've become part of the logos?
Yeah, there are many ways of saying that. I think that was the quote, if one goes back to look where the Chan or Zen teacher in China points to dana paramita as the entry. So you can use the language of, and also again in broadly in Mahayana and Vajrayana Buddhism, arousing bodhicitta or the mind of enlightenment is another way of saying what you just said, I believe. Maybe read it again, because that's a good quote.
Robert, can you read it again?
He's writing something.
Sorry, I thought he was going to read a quote. Sorry. Yeah, I can read it again.
Monica can read it. Somebody can read it. Yeah.
But true love is a creative force that emanates from the one logos. So everything emanates from the one logos. So I was just thinking that if you're really imbued with love, and like you say, if you have that seed of bodhicitta,
Yeah, I
then
think in
this yourself must just get wiped out in the stream of the logos.
yeah, in Theosophical and Blavatsky view of the human constitution, where she talks about the dual nature of manas as kama and buddhi manas. So, and again, in the Voice of the Silence in the early part, this would be also where she describes when the Buddhic intrinsic awakening part of our human nature becomes an active instead of a passive force. This would also be the same thing as what you're just quoting. And if that makes sense to, I think it does.
Yeah,
Judy?
yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Judy, we have a question from Judy Saltzman.
Judy Saltzman, hello.
Yes, thank you very much for a very informative talk. I just wonder if you would agree that Donna in Theosophy really is the same as Saint Paul means in the very wonderful passage in 1 Corinthians 13, where he says that you may speak with the tongues of wings and of angels, but if you have not charity or love, you are as sounding brass and tinkling cymbal. He says it to that effect. It's a paraphrase. And it seems important then that Donna is the first of the 6 paramitas, because it struck me, no matter how much your spiritual development is, if you don't really give or do it with a motive of helping other people, then you're really quite empty. Would you agree with that? Because I think that St. Paul does hit it on the head there in that famous passage. Thank you.
Yeah, that's perfect, Judy. Thank you. Yeah. Yes, Brenda.
The thing that because is on my mind right now, marriage. That this love, this commitment. I mean, isn't that what when you're talking about vows or partnering, or wouldn't this like be the floor? Like, isn't this what you would partner with someone to do? I mean, wouldn't this be? I mean, why would you do it if it wasn't for this level of engagement? You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, hopefully.
I
Hopefully.
mean, but
yes.
but we're in California.
We're
So,
in
how
what
we
year
get
is it?
married
2020. Yes.
Pardon me?
I was just trying to think of the year, but anyway.
That you've been married, or
No, the year that of the planet we're in.
We're in California.
But really, I think more, that may be an expression, but really the essential thing is our capacity with Donna to, this is just my example. We have to learn to marry the present moment. If you can't marry the present moment, it's not going to work with another person. In all our activity, when we're, especially in the most ones that we tend to discard as unimportant or mindless, when we're at the check stand getting groceries, when we're buying gas, when we're driving. Those are usually the times when we tend to get impatient and we get annoyed and we get our buttons pushed, isn't it? Curious. That's really where practice happens.
well, I'm also thinking family.
Family, yeah.
Look, dinner tables,
Yes.
Thanksgiving,
Yes.
all of this.
But a real Thanksgiving, not the unfortunate fact that Thanksgiving has the highest rate of domestic violence of any holiday.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm
Yes.
saying right here. That the people that we're supposed to love the most, we got all this drama going on.
Yeah.
What's up with that?
Yeah, we have to dissolve the drama into the dana process. Not necessarily easy, always.
I got a question, I think that piggybacks on Brenda's question, I think. And it ties in with your loop thing. You had about 3 loops, I think I counted. But anyway, the last one that you were talking about was mind transforms the gift transforms
Forms of the mind.
mind.
Yes.
And this thing about mind,
This what mind, yeah.
yeah, now mind is not, yeah, but I was thinking of with these deep commitments of family, for example,
Mm.
and people that are really committed to be a family and so forth, that somehow mind, I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about that loop in relation to deep commitments.
Yeah. Get closer to them.
Challenging.
I felt like the mind.
There's a lot there
Yeah.
to unpack for sure. I don't know, this pops up out of some distant anecdote. This came from, I believe, one of my early mentors, not specifically in theosophy, but I also in Jungian psychology, was a man named Robert Johnson, who became well known for many of the books he wrote later. Very contemplative person. But he gave an example once. He knew the only couple who had never ever had any dissonance or almost zero in their relationship was a man and woman. They had both been monastics in Catholic tradition prior. The man, of course, a monk, and the woman a nun, and they had left and married. And when they had an agreement in their relationship that whenever they felt some dissonance, that they could retreat for however long. And they practiced this 100% as much as possible. And that it would be all right with the other person. There might be an announcement one day, see you in a few weeks. And the person would go off and meditate and in their tradition pray and maybe be in nature and get deep into the source of the issue and come back. Harmonious relationship. Very different. Yeah, really. I share that because it's something not in our usual modern, busy, crazy world, Another example, is I'll say the story as quickly as possible, but it's an interesting story. It's one also told by, actually comes from Carl Jung and from that circle, retold by one of Jung's close associates, I think Barbara Hanna, where Robert Johnson heard it at that time, which is called the Rainmaker's Story. So in that story, it comes out of China. It originally came from Richard Wilhelm, the translator of the I Ching and Secret of the Golden Flower. So Wilhelm recounts this ancient Chinese story where the village has had no rain. And they're besides themselves and they don't know what to do. And so the villagers hear that far away, far across China, there's a great sage, diviner, and master who, if they invite him there, he can make it rain for them and save the village, because otherwise they're doomed. There's just no solution. So they gather together all the things they do to bring the man. He sets out traveling. It's a long journey of some weeks or months to come, and finally he gets there, and the older gentleman who's the diviner requests that he's very tired, and if they can provide him with a small hut and for him to collect himself, and then when he's ready, he will come to see what their problem is. So he disappears in the hut. One day goes by, 2 days go by. At the end of the third day, it's raining. And it's raining, and it's raining. The village is ecstatic. The man has solved their problem, they think, and they go pounding on the door to thank him, ask him what he wishes for them to give him, etc. The man comes out. He's quite surprised to see it raining. And he goes, "But I haven't done anything yet. I've only been working on settling my own inner imbalance." So again, Robert Johnson uses as a basis to talk about how important it is and how tremendous effect it has to work on our inner conflicting, resolve our inner demons. It's very powerful. He even gave a personal story once as an anecdote where, this is Robert Johnson, he traveled to India frequently in one period of his life. And it was new to him, some things, and he was with a friend of his there. They were sitting on a park bench talking. Like a hedge in between, and right on the other side of them, just a few feet away, but blocked by a hedge, a couple started having a violent argument. It was going on, and they had to stop talking, and they were just listening. And then this friend of Robert's, who was well versed in Indian yogic traditions and thought, turned to Robert and he said, "I think that either you or I are causing that fight. What do you think?" Robert said, "Oh, I hadn't thought of it this way." He says, "I think we should both stop and reflect and see if we can let something release and what happens, So first Robert spent some time meditating, reflecting, came back to his friend and said, "I don't find anything." And then the man said, "It's okay, let me try, And so then something happened. And the man stopped. And then suddenly the argument stopped. And the couple made up and walked away. And the man said, "It was me. It had nothing to do with them." So in that sense, all things contribute to all things. Or in some people have heard of the butterfly effect, where the butterfly in far distant south of Africa is connected to the hurricane in the Atlantic. So everything is interlinked, and we need to never underestimate the power of inner transformation.
It's like oracle. Know that sound.
Yes.
Ken, that does spark a question about that. You might also say quantum entanglement of interdependence.
Yes.
There's one psychiatrist I've heard of, that's near and dear to my heart, worked in a state hospital in Hawaii, I guess like Father Damien, the Hawaii connection. And he started doing this Ho'opono prayers. I can't say all the syllables.
Oh, yes.
Ho'opono. You can say it, Father. What was it?
I just wrote it.
He would take the written charts of his psychiatric, severely ill psychotic patients locked up in the state hospital, go to his house and meditate on them and ask them to forgive him
And so I imagine in that prayer process was kind of obliquely and maybe unconsciously doing some of this inner balancing within himself.
Yes.
That have a positive beneficial effect on the psychotic, angry, violent, acting out patient in the state hospital without the use of antipsychotic medications.
Yes.
Or maybe lower doses, who knows?
That is supposedly a very powerful mantra, that Hawaiian phrase, which is an apology. But supposedly it's an apology for, everything that may be fused into your aura that's unresolved, that brings into any environment some measure of chaos or misunderstanding but yeah, I remember hearing that mantra is very powerful, and they took it into I think insane asylum.
Yeah, it was a state hospital, yeah, for
Yeah,
the
people
mentally ill.
who
Yeah.
had begun to be healed. So those adepts.
Any more questions?
So Ken, this talking about Dana as a pathway to that inner work of the different levels of self you were talking about. Those one of the slides, those kind of paradoxical.
Someone says they can't hear the question.
Oh, they wrote in the text. They
Yeah,
can't hear.
she'll just put in the chat that she can't hear the question.
Oh, we had to repeat the questions.
Oh, and also, when you hear the question from anybody in here, you can just repeat the question.
In the
Yeah.
comments, can they hear the comments?
But they can't
I
hear
think they're saying they're not hearing this microphone.
I don't even know if it's on.
so they don't know what you're responding to.
Speak it, maybe speak into the mic.
Yeah.
Ask
Oh,
Shobha
okay.
if she can hear me.
Yeah, Shobha, this is Ken in the lodge talking on the other microphone. Can you hear us at all, or me at all? Because Ken Small's got a different microphone.
Shobha, can you hear us?
Can you hear me on this
Yes,
mic?
it says, yes.
Oh, she
Okay.
said,
Okay.
Oh, okay, because I think they were hearing Brenda earlier. So Ken, I was wondering, in one of your slides, you had a picture of the different aspects of self, and that Dana was a way, I think it was the one with the dark blue on the top. It says, be like the ocean, the paradox of self and selfless self.
Yes.
Yeah, and so I'm wondering, how does the story of those two men, Robert and the other, doing their inner work, kind of connect to that self and selfless self? And then it had this action at a
Yes.
distance, like the 1800s. Scientists talk about action at a distance for electromagnetism or something.
Well, in recognizing their own internal dissonance and
Yeah.
releasing it,
Yeah.
it released the conflict zone. It's not that one had to oh, I'm going to focus on the couple and solve their problem. They're having a problem.
Yeah,
No. It's our problem, and it's
Personal.
I'm feeding it. Or
Mhm.
seeing, they discovered it that way, and releasing it, not trying to quote fix it, but releasing it. So in that sense, spontaneously it releases.
Mhm.
It's how I would say. It's because it's in the nature of things for that to happen.
I just wanted to say thank you, first of all, for how you explain Dana, because I don't think this student understood it as well as you have put it forth. I knew that Dana means generosity, but there's the prerequisite to one's ability to be generous depends on how well we connect with these different planes. And the idea of going beyond the pairs of opposites was also slightly startling to think in that way of generosity. So
Wonderful,
thank you for
yes.
that.
It's an invitation to be startled.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But really, it's also, don't think of this as something unusual. We are actually, maybe not with full awareness, but we do this all the time.
Yes, we're engaged in it, but
We need to add a little more awareness with it.
Yes, and the voice of the silence seems to point to gives us the idea of becoming conscious about it, and so that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and so the voice of the silence is so packed. We have to also remember that, you know, it's really a lot, and a lot of the seeming parts. I mean, I begin to appreciate more and more that it's not a sequential book, like one ABC. It's not a which part of the brain? A left brain book.
Oh, yeah.
It's a kind of a whole. I was trying to think of it. It's sort of a holographic book.
Yeah.
And all these different pieces are interconnected in unusual ways. I think it's quite unique that way.
Thank you.
You know, I was looking earlier today at the HUB's Theosophical Glossary, and she wrote Donna was almsgiving to mendicants. I was wondering, in that function of, you know, giving something to a beggar, that can help lead you to the realization that you and the beggar are really not different, and then kind of crack the egg of that illusion of separateness and go into
Yes.
that non-duality. Does that make sense?
Yes, when it's given in that mode, yes.
With that intentionality
Yes.
in your mind, as opposed to, I'm going to give this to the beggar so people will think I'm a good person and elevate my little ego, you know.
Right.
That's another way to give to beggars. But
Or looking down at the beggar, it's like, oh, this poor person, you know.
Yeah.
It's quite different.
You know, I was thinking about some of the talk with Donna, and we've been talking about inner relationships. It reminded me of the great work that you're familiar with Marshall Rosenberg, Nonviolent Communication.
Yes,
Yes.
yeah, it's great.
Yeah,
Yes.
because he did really wonderful work, and seems to be an aspect of Donna. And I was thinking a couple of points that he makes kind of in his general work is interesting. That the idea isn't necessarily to end disagreements between people. We can honestly disagree with others about many things, you know, our whole life. But the goal is to increase empathy and understanding of the other.
Right.
By developing the power of listening and, you know, and questioning in our own motives and things that you've described so far. So I just thought I'd throw that in.
Yeah, nonviolent communication founded by Marshall Rosenberg is extraordinary. And at one point, he personally was, for example, during the conflicts in the Balkans, in Yugoslavia, he went personally to mediate things. And I think he also was in the Middle East at that time as well.
Yeah.
And all over the world. Great method. Yeah, deep listening, non-reactivity, accepting of differences. This involves Donna for sure.
you know, Ken, that sounds very much like the Catholic monastic married couple that would have their feeling of dissonance and then separate, but not necessarily come to a negotiation. They're not trying to negotiate with each other.
No,
They're
not
just lovingly accepting.
Yeah, so you could say in modern, you know, in our current language, not transactional.
Yeah.
Not like, oh, I'll change this, and you change that, and then we'll be happily ever after. Of course, that never works, right?
Well, you think that it's like this unconditional love that people talk about, like you know, unconditional love, like with no parameters around it, it's a total accept. I don't know, but you know, you hear about it. But would this be that realm?
It's heading in that direction. I mean, in our current stage of evolution, we have to accept the fact that we don't stand there and stay there. We have to work at it every day. It takes extra effort.
So what would have to change then? Our sense of space, time, like that we're on a continuum, that we're not fixed beings, that we're evolving, I mean, we're changing, evolving all the time. So will that give us that space, that void to grow into to
Yeah.
the next level?
Yeah, you got that's it. Yeah. Stepping out of ourself into the fluidity of things.
More.
Question.
Yeah.
There was that slide that was including some of the voice of the silence quotes talking about, and I don't have it memorized, but it's the part of not allowing another person to suffer until that you yourself have dried the tear. And something to do with the idea with not figuring, oh, well, somebody else is going to handle that or something.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you could talk about that.
Mm.
Yes. I think here Blavatsky's giving a very poetic expression to this deep and profound view of that compassion is something essential and innate in the world. And it's also something that we need to do. It's something we engage in. At the same time, at least my comment on that is that there are different modes, different types of people have different ways. And all these different modes are actually covered in the voice of silence in different areas. For example, the very great contemplative monastic Thomas Merton, writing on the contemplative life. He was a Trappist anti-war person, advocate, extraordinary human being, East-West liaison person, social activist. At any rate, in one point, someone was asking him about the contemplative life. Well, what are these you Trappists sitting out there in or the Benedictines or the Zen Buddhists or all over traditions sitting in your room contemplating? How does this help the world as well? And his comment was, it's the function or duty of the contemplative to take the wounds of the world into their own soul and heal them. It's not that they're separate, they're actually more intimately connected if it's done right. It's appropriate. It is very profound, I thought, and very true, in that really profound contemplation of the essential nature of compassion is doing what Blavatsky's saying in that quote. It is engaging in this profound, the Buddhists call Avalokiteshvara or Kuan Yin, this profound compassion that absorbs the sorrows of the world. Yes.
Codependency.
Yes.
This
good.
is a word. This is for us here in the Western. See, if you go too far out doing all of that for others, somebody's going to label you codependent, or it's a trait not to be exalted. It's something to be exploited. If you find it's weak. Okay, that you're vulnerable.
So
And you're in
here's
California, somebody can
this would lead to
schedule you, you know, that sort of thing.
this would lead to another hour discussion, I'm afraid.
I'm trying to take it home.
But
You know
and
what
I
I'm
almost
saying?
I was going to go there and then I stopped. But
Oh,
what I was going to suggest was that when taken on the surface and not to the inner depth of the paramitas, but when taken on the surface, all of them have what we could call a near enemy.
okay.
So, of course, the near enemy of dana is what? Codependency, which isn't helping anyone. And then if we were to get into discussing the difference of how to sort this out, we'll be here for a while.
Well,
But actually, each of the paramitas have this, they're very subtle, you know, in a sense, not mean that they're obscure, they're very subtle to have the right balance with the paramita. You know, it could be appropriate in the mode of compassion, even with dana, is tough love.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So we have to be very aware. This comes into the other paramitas. Well, other people will get to down the line. We have to be very aware of what the pivot point is. Oh, should I help? This person is like, oh, help me. No, this is not dana.
That's
This is, but if we aren't really aware, you know, I mean, anything is possible. And how do we know? Like, okay, the beggar is, oh, I need something for a sandwich. Oh, no, he needs something to go get some alcohol or drugs. And you say, no, sorry. How do we know? Or they really do need it sincerely.
or we project onto them. We think that they are not entitled to, or
Right.
whatever it is,
All those things.
or we don't hear them, or we
All
don't
those
think
things,
that.
yes. So,
Yes, but this is our Western society.
yes.
This is the dance.
We have to really work hard to integrate, really, you know, the paramitas are listed as 7, but really they're all interdependent at any given moment at the same time. And it's necessary because we need the insight and wisdom from prajna or prajna, you know, and dhyana. You know, we have to have all these elements to be able to see clearly. You know, Blavatsky adds vairagya into the middle. We need that kind of dispassionate, so we're not hooked by things, you know.
Mhm.
All these things are needed at any given activity.
Wondering, tied in with that is, it seems like this idea of not allowing one tier to just be there and another person. It seems like and you use the word engage. The compassion is something you have to do it. You can say metaphysically it's in the universe, but at some point, page 3B seems to be saying you have to get out of your own way and do something, right? But I was also thinking in that passage there, in the Voice of Silence, where it seems to be also coming into tune with one's own sensitivity.
Yes.
And not just turn a blind eye on one's own sensitivity. In other words, it's an embracing of one's almost vulnerability, because it seems like one is putting oneself in a vulnerable place by being so sensitive to the suffering of other people. I was wondering if you could talk about
It's
that.
very paradoxical. I mean, it's simultaneously very vulnerable, but very aware of that vulnerability at the same time, and also being able to act in a sense, one having to let go of that vulnerability to take some kind of action, whether it's internal action or external action, I don't think matters, but depends on one's characteristics and situation. All these things, it's not formulaic. We can't say, oh, in this situation you need, 2 parts Dana, 1 part Shanti, 1 part. It doesn't work that way. It's just they're all interconnected, and it's in the moment.
Courage.
Courage, virya.
Courage, because you're vulnerable. So if you're in fear, you're not gonna do any of that.
Right.
But so courage, you're gonna have to get that.
Yeah, the virya and paramita.
And assessment of, is it safe? You don't want to be, doing something that is it doesn't honor self. While you're trying to help somebody else, you can't self-sacrifice if that's not what you want to do. Say, right? Something like that.
Yeah, it's deep. It's deep. We have to get underneath all this, It may be something very small, very subtle.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily a big thing.
Right.
Yeah. It could be very I don't know. These stories come out of long ago. This is again, I'm looking at our psychiatrist here. So this comes from, again, Robert Johnson's story, where he shared once. Of course, he's studied in the Jung Institute in Zurich, and then saw clients, worked here in San Diego, and he got a call in the middle of the night once from a client who he'd seen fairly recently. The client had latent suicidal thoughts. He knew this. He knew him well. Worked with dreams and things, and he gets a call at 2 a.m. He's being woken up. He's slightly annoyed, which is very unusual because he's extremely calm, monkish, contemplative character, Robert Johnson. And the man is acutely suicidal. And Robert says, just came out of him. He had no idea where this came from. Did you brush your teeth before you went to bed tonight? And the guy goes, no. He goes, go brush your teeth and go to sleep. Then he hung up. And after he hung up, he was like, oh my God, what have I done? And then he felt like, no, this is okay, And then get a call the next day. The man's very thankful. He said, oh. Now, I'm not using that, necessarily to follow that next time, but it shifted him back into the present.
Yes.
And I know many other examples of people in deep depression. What brought them out of the deep depression went on for a long time. Meds didn't work, nothing worked, What got out of the depression? Well, this is someone, in their 40s, career, midlife crisis, all kinds of things melting down. He had to go back and live with his elderly parents. And what did his father one day said? Why don't you go paint the fence? It's a fairly big fence. He started painting the fence every day. By the time he finished painting the fence, the depression had started to lift.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi there, Ken. Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation, and for everybody for
hi, yeah,
stimulating discussion. Thank you. I wonder if that was kind of what this compassion, when you say take the wounds of the world into your own soul and heal them, if this was not the basis of the masters and Jesus, for example, who took on the sins of others. this is like a burden, and it made me think of the idea of unconditional love. Because we can talk a lot about conditional love, but really it's the ability to let go, as you said earlier, of your own feelings of, maybe for instance, revenge. We have a father whose son was brutally murdered, and he ended up, they found the gentleman that committed the murder. He ends up going to this man's cell, and not only forgives him but takes him into his arms, almost like that he's his own son. And there's I guess a period where he and this the boy's father, actual father, and the murdered son's father, are actually going, on tour, talking about this relationship and about healing through forgiveness and healing through total acceptance of another human being. And
Yeah.
when I think about how we typically deal with crime today, in such a revengeful kind of, well, let's, eye for an eye kind of an attitude, and I was thinking, we go out, we want to explain or show people how bad murder is by murdering them. I mean, it's just ironic. Um, so I'm wondering if we could use more of this in the world, a changing of the mind, a changing of the heart, a redirecting of that stream, or at least allowing that stream to flow as it naturally should. We would, in time, see a lot of progress. I have faith in that we would see progress in our penal systems, if we just took a moment to apologize to each other, you know, and take on that responsibility. I think it's a very true Christian thing to do. And
Yeah, that's
also,
actually the
I was just going to add to that, and I'm binging on NDEs, near death experience people now, right? So almost every one of them comes back and says there is such a overflooding of love in that state that it changes their lives forever. This has to be that river you're talking about, you know? It has
yeah,
to be
and we
that.
don't have to wait till we die to do that.
We don't have to wait till we go back home and remember.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
the example you give is actually a very local, very close by example. It's the Camisa Foundation, and the murder of his son took place very close to where we are today, about maybe 25 or so years, 30 years ago. I forget. Yeah, and very profound thing that Mr. Camisa did in doing. Yeah.
Information in the chat.
Which still exists today. They still do outreach, all kinds of things, wonderful things.
Looks like, why don't we take a look at the chats and then call it a day here?
Yeah.
Let me get that going here. Let's see here. That one's more perfunctory. Anyway, you can go up and down with 2 fingers.
Okay.
2 fingers parallel, horizontal to each other,
Okay.
like that.
No questions particularly, just thank Judy says thank you. Thank you, Judy. Yes.
Everything's brilliant.
Everyone else is brilliant. Thank you.
Class or do we? Namaste. That's what we do.
More homework. Have fun with it.
All right, well, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. No, I'm taking that
Thanks,
home.
Ken.
Thank you, Desiree.
Hope you'll come back by popular demand.
Anytime, sure.
Absolutely.
I may do had a wonderful time also last week, as I said, with the Theosophical group in Texas. Thank you all again. That was great fun. And I may do something by Zoom over summer on the Voice of the Silence
Yeah.
as a source book in the Paramitas.
Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Thank you. Yes.
And
Excellent. I'm glad this is mine. I should
next
go.
week, our presentation is on what, Monica? Or
See, next week we have Gemini and Punarvasu.
so our ongoing series. See, this was part of the series too, the Voice of the Silence series.
Yeah.
But also we're doing a monthly series kind of simultaneously over the 12 months of the year on the signs of the zodiac. And so next week it'll be Gemini and kind of an interesting twist on it, Gemini and Punarvasu.
Gemini and
One of the main
Punarvasu.
archetypes of Gemini.
The Gemini archetype. Here we are in Gemini.
All right.
Shall I end?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Bye.
Thank you.